Hello, I'm Cielle Backstrom, a Trillium Awakening teacher. I'm here today with CC Leigh. CC spent some time with me recently talking about practicing mutuality, especially some guidelines for practicing mutuality. And one thing that she alluded to is that because we're human, sometimes mutuality gets messy. So I have invited CC back to give us some tips on what we can do when mutuality gets messy. And especially I like in talking to Cici about this because she's a longtime teacher in Trillium Awakening and goes back to early days and has a lot of historical background on mutuality and what we can do to make things work. So Cici, let's hear from you.
Hi, I'm happy to be with you today. It was a pleasure to dive into those guidelines for practicing mutuality and discuss some of how those came about, because exactly what you say, even though we are awakening and hopefully incorporating more and more of a depth of spiritual awareness in our lives and in our relationships, we are still inevitably human, and being human is complicated. Just comes down to it's complicated. And when you have strong people who are in the same room together, they're going to rub up against each other at times. What one wants, what the other one wants, what one has for broken zones that get triggered, that the other one may not even have any awareness of whatsoever, and all of a sudden there's a big explosion or flare up or just hurt feelings and withdrawal, and things can spiral out pretty quickly. And because we care, because we are not inherently divided or separate from one another, we are really profoundly connected, then it's our intention not to be stepping on each other's toes or hurting each other's feelings or causing great rifts in relationship with people that we care about and love. So there are some ways of being together that really support inviting people to feel safe and to come forward. And we talked about some of those in the other video, the practicing mutuality guidelines. And today I really want to talk about a practice that's become really one of the central practices of our culture here, our community of Trillium Awakening. And that is called coconut yoga, which is really a very colorful term that I give credit to Samuel Bonder for coining. And if you think about a tall palm tree with a coconut up in the leaves, when that coconut's ready to fall, it falls to the ground directly into the sand with a big thud. And coconut yoga term was born out of that, the idea that if somebody is expressing that they feel like I've injured them in some way, then one thing I can do to help make it right is lower my head to the ground as if it were a coconut falling into the sand, and express my concern and care for what's happened. But it's important that we maybe go into some of the particulars of what coconut yoga actually means, because some people have mistaken ideas, kind of a Christian idea of, well, I have to forgive my enemies, or even some social cultural idea that if somebody accuses me of doing something wrong and I agree with them, it means that I'm saying, yeah, I did wrong. But I don't really want to do that because I don't feel like I did anything wrong. And so there's some nuances here that really make a difference in the fullness of the practice. So I want to get into some of those in in a minute, but before I do it, I might give a little history of how Cielle taught us about coconut yoga. And Cielle, to his credit, to his great credit, was not what we might call a platform guru, or a teacher who's up on the stage and he's the one with all the answers and the one in the know and the one who speaks the words of wisdom. And in that scenario where the student's really not expected to challenge or question the teacher. Cielle really was relational with the students and was available to feedback. So, and yet he also was a very strong personality. So there would be times where Cielle had said something or just came the way he came into the room or the way he presented himself that somebody somewhere might have gotten their feelings hurt or gotten triggered by something. And he really went out of his way to try to calmly receive their feedback, to really listen to what they were saying and try to get what was going on in them. And then he would use it as a teaching moment by being available for that. Now, Cielle was also human, so sometimes it didn't go by the book. Sometimes it got spiraled kind of out of control at times. So maybe sometimes Cielle got his feelings hurt. But that's all part of what we call the coconut yoga practice, which is learning that sometimes it takes 2 or 3 passes before everyone feels like they actually were heard and met. That's what it's all about, is hanging in together, hearing whatever it was that didn't go down well. And it might have been something you said, it might have been something you did, might have been based on nothing at all, but just based on that person's history, that something got triggered. And they're trying to figure out why it's doing around in them and it won't let them rest. And they're all agitated and upset and maybe don't have a great sense of, now what do I do? So that's the little bit of the background. And we as teachers have, each and every one of us, had occasions when people brought us feedback that maybe wasn't the easiest thing in the world to hear. So we've all had to practice it because we're all human. We all end up bumping up against each other.
Yeah, I know. I think that what I'm really taking in from this right now is that, and you've said this before, being human doesn't mean we're perfect. And in our showing up in mutuality as who we are, sometimes we inadvertently will trigger somebody. And that coconut yoga, that leaning in, it can be a back and forth process, is one where we let the other person know that we hear them. And we hear the impact that our behavior or words had on them. And it's not an admission of guilt. It's a deep meeting of the other in the pain that has arisen in them. And so it's a beautiful dance of listening and receiving and honoring that can be so profoundly healing in a way that other practices kind of really don't meet that profound, really deep meeting that is an opportunity when we realize it. And we free ourselves from trying to be perfect in every moment. We can just be who we are authentically, recognizing that our authentic nature can sometimes push other people away, but we then meet them. We can invite them to share, how did that land in you? And then meet them right at that place of, to create understanding and compassion. So thank you. And thanks for sharing some of the history of this as well. But it's not just a historical event that happened at some point in the past. It's a way of being that we bring forward in this work all the time.
Yes. Well, Thank you. Thank you. It's a way of being that we attempt to bring. And I will say what I value about it, it's a gracious gesture that is extended to help bring people to a place where they can hear and meet one another. So and I like that you've said it's not necessarily an admission of guilt. It's deep. So let's say somebody comes to me and says, I really didn't like what you said, and it hurt my feelings, and you had no right to say that. You were way out of line. So from my position, I may immediately almost instinctually want to defend myself. No, I didn't say that. I didn't mean that. No, I think you misheard me. I did. So what's that going to do? That's not going to do anything except make the person want to argue their side even more strongly. So instead, if I can dig deep into myself and find a place where, okay, well, I don't know if I did that or if I didn't do that, but whatever it was that happened, this person's letting me know that they got hurt. So maybe I could just listen. Maybe I could just listen and take it in and set my own reactivity and defensiveness aside for a little bit. And so that's how it goes. So coconut yoga takes a leaning in from both parties. The person whose feelings got hurt has to dig deep and find the courage to come up to someone and say, I didn't like what you said. That wasn't okay with me. And that can be a scary thing. It has a lot of potential for healing in it. And that's why we practice this practice, is because we've seen how much it can help people go further, not just sit in their reactivity or get angry or get bent or take it out on the next person down the line. Come forward vulnerably and say, listen, I want to bring some feedback. Now, if you're the person bringing the feedback, it can be very helpful to actually check in and say, I'd like to bring some feedback. Are you available for that? Which lets the person take a moment and maybe get ready for it. So they're not just being blindsided. And maybe they'll say, well, sure, but not right this minute. Maybe you need to make a time to sit down together when you'll both be available. So it also is very helpful if the person who is bringing the feedback has some idea of what kind of redress they would like to hear. Do they want to hear someone say, I'm sorry? Or do they want that person to take some other action? So having some idea of what you'd like to get out of it can be very helpful as far as really moving toward a healing encounter with each other. So, do you have anything to add at that point?
Nothing's coming to mind. I think you're really describing this really beautifully. And yeah, so I'm curious to hear what else you have to say about this.
Well, since I'm talking about the person bringing feedback, here's another point. And there are guidelines on our website, trilliumawakening.org, but we're also, just mentioned my book again, in chapter 8, which is the chapter on mutuality and love trust, the guidelines for coconut yoga are spelled out in here. If you're wanting to bring feedback to someone, keep in mind that it's hard for most people to hear feedback. especially those who had critical parents and for whom criticism brings forth extreme shame. Try to make some allowance for them to be imperfect at this too. And then another important point, try to be willing to forgive the other for whatever they did that brought you pain. Now, the emphasis there is on the word willing. I'm not implying that you should automatically forgive anyone, depending on what they did and whether it was trivial or significant. Forgiveness might be difficult. And I want to talk a little more about forgiveness, because forgiveness, many people think forgiving means, I forgive you, okay, let's go back to just being exactly who we used to be together. It means I have to welcome you back into my life, and I have to carry on as if this is completely wiped out and no longer a factor. But I hold forgiveness a little differently. I hold forgiveness as being willing to reopen my connection and my heart to them. However, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to immediately start trusting them. And that's okay. So if somebody has repeatedly ignored how I feel, for instance, or repeatedly done things that I felt slighted by, whatever, I might be willing to forgive them, and I might find it in my heart that I am forgiving of them because I know they're human and imperfect. And yet I might not be as immediate to welcome them back at the same level. Now, it's okay. I know it's okay to invite them to show me how they're taking in the feedback, and that they actually heard me, and that they care enough to maybe modify their behavior some. So forgiveness is not just a spiritual practice. It's a good one. It's good for my heart, but it also opens the door to, let's see if we can resume our relationship, but maybe coming back into that a little tentatively, or a little inviting one another to see how we show up going forward.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying here, CC. And one of the other principles in the Trillium work is daring and perseverance, and they often go hand in hand. That it can be, like you've already said, an act of daring or an act of courage to step forth and to say that I was hurt. But that idea of perseverance, we have to persevere in terms of a relationship. We might have to, like you said, there might be back and forth between the two parties to really get to a place where they both feel like they've been heard. And you have to persevere in terms of the development of trust. And not expect that it's going to be restored instantaneously. That trust can take a long time to be restored. And that's natural. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just takes that. But what I'm also really liking and hearing you speak is I feel there's so much compassion here. There's compassion for the difficulty. That it's not wrong if this is hard. It's not wrong if it takes some introspection on both sides. That is part of us showing up in our authenticity. So I just was feeling so much compassion in what you're saying, and also just that each situation is unique. We can have principles, but we can't really dictate exactly how this is going to, the next steps of action. We have to be sensitive to what it is that's working for us. And we'll have an inner sense, did I feel heard?
Right.
Those kind of things. Right? We'll have an inner sense, does that person really receiving my feedback? But, all these practical things, like you said, like Sometimes the person's not in a state of mind to receive feedback, and we have compassion for that.
Right.
It's a gentle process of really practicing mutuality in very mature ways, very advanced ways.
Right.
So thank you.
Right.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. What else do you have to share with us today? I'm really enjoying this.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you're the one who's receiving feedback, so we talked a bit about if you're the one bringing the feedback, but if you're the one on the receiving end, cover a few of the bullet points here. To whatever degree you can, stay open to receiving feedback from anyone who registers they're feeling hurt or wounded by you in some way. Keeping it in mind how difficult it is for people to come forward and trying to just support them and acknowledge their effort in speaking up. Practice active listening by repeating the essence of what you've heard them say. Continue this until they agree that you've fully gotten their message. Do this before you jump in and present your side of the issue. And I'm smiling a bit as I read that because I know how hard this step is. That desire to defend yourself and is strong. So take a breath, keep listening, keep checking with them to see if they feel like you've really heard what they were bringing. And back to compassion, find some sense of compassion or regret for the hurt they feel, even if you don't think you caused it or should be held responsible. Just let them know you care about how they feel. Now, this is a good point. If you can't feel compassion for their pain or upset, it might be a clue that you're feeling defensive because now something's triggered in you. Rather than fake it, let them know in the simplest way possible that you're not fully available to meet them at this time. And plan another meeting. So if you get triggered and you find your blood pressure's rising, it's okay to say, whoa, I want to hear you, but this isn't the best time for me. Let's get back together and do this. And plan another time. Don't just put it off. So, and this is true for either party, if you feel too triggered, if something about trying to bring the feedback or hear the feedback is just getting you really activated, take a breath, take some space, talk to a teacher or a friend, or we have teachers who act as mediators. They can be very good resources just to talk to about how you're upset. So they can help you be kind of a pressure valve. And as you talk it out with a third party who's not the one who's directly involved, you might get more clarity about what it's bringing up in yourself. So once you can meet and you can hear, see if you can find out what that person who's bringing the feedback wants from you. An apology or some other form of amends. And if possible, give them what they want, including your sincere intention to not repeat the same behavior in the future. That's important. It may or may not be possible for you to be 100% sure of that, but have a sincere intention to no longer cause them pain if you can help it. And then, assuming that that's gone well, you can check in and see if they're willing to hear if they're now willing to hear your side of it. And again, if not now, then maybe at some time in the not too distant future, because that will help you too to be able to say, this is how it was for me. when that was going on. And both of you can come to a deeper meeting of being to being, really, of beings. Understanding, oh, from my history, you know, it was this way. And from your history, I get that it was really radically different. So isn't that amazing and strange and challenging? And if we can come together around that, then we both heal and become a little more whole.
Yeah, really beautiful, CC. And I think you're catching these bullet points from your book. Is that not correct? Yeah.
Right. So. Although they're also pretty much the same in the document that's called the guide.
Okay. Yeah. So people have resources. I mean, if this video is available, but if you want to see it in a written form, because some people respond to written forms better, know that that's available both in CC's book and also on our website. Trilliumawakening.org.
Right. Well, I believe hopefully where you post this video, you'll also give a link to that.
Yes,
so
definitely.
Make it easy for people to refer to.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Remember that coconut yoga is a generous gesture toward mutuality, rather than something anyone is entitled to receive. It's a gift if someone's willing to participate with you this way. So keep that in mind and appreciate it. Appreciate efforts even when they're not done perfectly. So the sweetness of this is when it leads to insights and breakthroughs in relationship. And, you know, it's, and especially, of course, coconut yoga might happen between a teacher and a student, but it certainly happens also between two people in relationship. Can happen between a mother and a child, or a father and a child. Can happen between two friends who are peers, you know, who are very equal. But it behooves us, as we're all learning and growing, deepening in our practice of mutuality, it behooves us to be aware that the person who's most familiar with it, we sometimes say they're in the power position. It might be that you're the boss and they're the employee. You know, and that may or may not actually apply in your relationship. But if it is some kind of a power differential, it's especially useful if the one who feels less in the power position feels hurt, that they really get listened to and heard. You know, one of the most reasons it's so powerfully useful and transformative is that most of us in the past, from the time we were kids and the time we were in school with teachers or whoever, you know, we got our toes stepped on, our feelings hurt, we got insulted, we got slighted, we got passed over, whatever we did, and we had nowhere to go. And no one was really listening, taking it in, or really seemed to care at all about our feelings. So when we dare to bring those feelings to someone, especially somebody who, you know, who care about, and we might be afraid to do it, but when they actually listen, it's profound. It's really profound. And it can happen. So I encourage everyone to incorporate as much as possible, as clumsily as necessary, but just have that in your being that you can do this. And give it a try, see how it works for you.
Yeah, and to just really recognize the need to engage in this practice of the coconut yoga is not an indication that something that the parties involved have done anything wrong. It just that it doesn't mean like, oh, I must not be very awakened because I had to bring some feedback to someone or I had to receive some feedback. It's just part of being human, and we really need to continually kind of take away the myths of awakening, that it means that we become perfect. And I know this is a kind of myth that can hang on for a long time. Like when I get more awakened or farther down the road, I'll have proof of it because I won't have any interrelational conflicts, but we do. And then we have a tool that we can use, that we've used for decades now, that
Yes.
is very, very, very effective. So.
Now that is exactly right. Thank you for bringing that. It's so true that awakening doesn't do away with being a human with a body and a history and likes and dislikes and places of wounding that no one else actually knows about until they inadvertently trigger my perimeter defenses, and all of a sudden I'm experiencing a reaction 10 times more than a normal untriggered person would, and that still happens. And it probably always will, because we just don't know where all those zones are.
Yeah, I really like this expression, perimeter defenses. It's not one that I really heard before. I've heard of kind of like broken trigger, whatever, hidden trip mines or something like that. But this is a really good
What I
one.
thought of is around a camp that people are defending, they put tripwires, and they're attached to the bells that ring or the cans that rattle or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. People stumble into those tripwires.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we didn't know we stumbled into them until we hear those bells being rung by someone else.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, well, anything more that you want to share with us about coconut yoga?
I think that was mostly it.
Okay.
Again, I'd be surprised if any teacher in Trillium hasn't found the occasion when they needed to practice this. So.
Oh, I will confess that it was only about 2 weeks ago that I needed to practice it. And it was really, I admired the student that brought something to me. And it also gave me, before we set up a time to talk, but it also gave me a chance to reflect. What was it in me that had wanted, that I wanted to say these things to her? And it helped me really to, I just said there was something you said the last time we met that didn't really sit right with me. And she gave a little headline. And I had a chance to actually do some introspection before we actually got onto the next call to see, what had been my motivation behind it. And what I really found was that I actually had, I was feeling uncomfortable with something that was going on in her life. And actually my expression that didn't land inside of her was some advice, actually. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I gave that advice is because I so wanted her not to feel the way she did. But it's mostly, I didn't want to have her feel the way she did. And so there was unconsciously, I thought if she would take these action steps, she wouldn't have to feel discomfort, and then I wouldn't have to feel her discomfort. So it was actually a beautiful, so by the time we actually had the conversation, it was so easy for me to listen to her, because I'd already done some introspection about what had motivated me, in this case, to give some advice that she hadn't asked for. And it did land in her as if I didn't really trust her. I didn't trust her awakening, her mature adult decision-making capabilities. And so it was very easy for me to say, I really hear you. But it was so important for me to investigate the discomfort that I had felt and that I hadn't really put a finger on. And instead, I just wanted to have her to make a different choice in life so that I wouldn't feel that internal discomfort. So again, that field of non-separation, though, is also very interesting to navigate. I mean, I was literally in my body feeling her discomfort because she was in a kind of a bind. And I didn't want to feel it in myself. So I went into fix-it mode. And, if she hadn't given me that feedback, I wouldn't have recognized that I'd gone into fix-it mode. So.
Thank you so much for sharing your own recent story about that, and how human, again, what a great illustration of something we were talking about last time in the last video about practicing mutuality, which is what we find out before very long with people who are awakening and mature and strong beings is that it rarely solves anything.
Nope. It only caused problems. But it was good though, because it actually, in the end, we got closer to each other.
There you go.
You know, so it was really a beautiful, she dared to speak it to me. I listened, I learned about myself, but we got closer.
Oh, that is so important. Thank you for giving us that example, because part of the genius of Trillium Awakening, I think, is that the fact that quote unquote messing up is often a thing that really brings new insight, healing, and growth, and can bring people closer. So the act of inadvertently doing something that requires someone now to actually speak up brings them further into their own embodiment and their own power. And the fact that that person spoke up and was received by you can really be a big step forward in their own ongoing evolution.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Oh, thank you, CC. Any closing remarks?
Oh, I think we've done it.
Yeah, thank you for your time in these 2 videos that you've, donated your time and expertise to. I really value it and learned from you as well. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Here's to deepening in mutuality on many levels.